All right, hi guys. My name's Christina Stanger, and I was in the Navy from 2000 to 2004. I was in VFA 115, which was a F-18 squadron stationed in Lemoore, California, and we were attached. I'm going to read off my paper just a little bit in this first part, because I don't want to miss anything and forget to tell you guys something and leave a big hole in the story. But they were attached to an air wing that was attached to the aircraft carrier Abraham Lincoln, which is in the Nimitz class of carriers. Let's see, my second deployment, you might remember, maybe, some of you won't, some of you will, but it was the ship that George W. Bush flew out to give his big mission accomplished speech. So we've got some pictures of that here in a little bit that I can show you. The part that you might not know about, though, was the couple of months leading up to that. So I'm going to tell you guys that story because it was an experience now that I feel very lucky to have been a part of and gotten to experience. So that was my second deployment on the Lincoln. My first deployment on the Lincoln started in, I believe, August or September of 2000. And that was kind of a rough cruise. The USS Cole had just been bombed pierside in Yemen. And I was not on the ship yet. I had graduated boot camp in August and then went to Pensacola for my airman school for about 2 weeks, and then I hung out in Lemoore for a couple of weeks waiting for an airplane ride out there. So once I got out there, that had just happened, and so they weren't allowing anybody to come on the ship. They weren't doing any flight ops, kind of everything was shut down. So we got to hang out in Jebel Ali for about 2 weeks. So we finally made it out there. The problem was, though, we didn't get to make any port calls because obviously they didn't want us pulling in anywhere. So we spent a little over 100 days at sea, and that probably doesn't sound like that big of a deal, but every day that we're out to sea is a work day. And it's a 12-hour shift for us. Ship's company is a little different. They work 3 8-hour shifts, but we work 2 12-hour shifts. So every day. So kind of lost track, didn't know what day it was, didn't know what month it was. We were just out there, but we got a Still Beach picnic out of it. A lot of fun. Some non-alcoholic beer. They grilled some burgers. So that was a lot of fun. Let's see, I want to make sure I don't skip anything on that one. So about the Abraham Lincoln, that's part of the 5th, that battle group is part of the 5th Fleet. And our theater was the South Pacific and the Persian Gulf. That first cruise, we were over in the Persian Gulf supporting Operation Southern Watch, which not a real popular one, nobody's really heard about it. It was kind of the carryover from the Gulf War, kind of what we were doing from the Gulf War, between the Gulf War and Enduring Freedom. So that's pretty much what we spent our time doing then. So we got home, and after about 6 months, and we were rewarded for that terrible cruise by being able to be the first squadron that got the new Super Hornets, and they're the F-18Es. We would be the first seagoing squadron to ever get to take them to sea, and we ended up being the first squadron to take them into combat. So, kind of a cool thing, I was the first woman to ever load ordnance on a seagoing F-18, and wartime, and also during wartime. That might sound really cool, but really it's not. I was just happened to be the only one, so I get to say I wasn't the one. So we spent about a year, because there was about a year between those cruises, where we transitioned into the new airplanes. They were still Hornets, still F-18s, but a lot of the weapon systems were different. Just in general, a lot of things were different about them. At this time, I had not actually gone to the ordnance shop to load bombs and missiles yet. And I'll tell you all a little bit more about that later, but I was still a plane captain at this time, which is an undesignated rate that you go into, and that's rude. If you don't already have a job, when you get into the Navy, they send you to kind of a grunt work situation, and that's what the line check is. You basically set up the plane for the pilot. The pilot, or that plane is your baby. You do all the inspections on it, you get it ready, you wash it, you clean it, you do all the things. It's your baby, and here in a minute I'll show you a picture of my name actually got to be put on the side of it, kind of a cool little incentive. But we transitioned over into the Super Hornets, and we started our cruise and our deployment in, let's see, I have it written in my papers here. Oh, July of 2002, yes. So that would have been the deployment, the first deployment right after 9/11. So this is post 9/11. So everything's kind of crazy. Enduring Freedom has already started. So I'm just going to read off my paper here. We flew 214 missions and dropped 22 JDAM bombs on 14 targets before December. So we left in July. And we had flown 214 combat missions. And that's just our squadron. There are many squadrons on the ship. That's just our squadron. JDAM bombs are 2,000 pounders. They're called bunker busters. They penetrate the ground and can explode things below. So about December, we started heading home. That was our 6 months. We were going to make a port stop in Australia before we went home. And on our way down there, about a week before Christmas, the captain came over the 1MC and said, "Surprise! We're not going home. we're getting extended because something might happen." We didn't know what, but that's what we were told. So there were lots of tears, a lot of upset people. Obviously, most people have been away from their families for 6 months. They want to go home. They're not real pleased. So we go to Australia. We spend 3 weeks down there resurfacing the flight deck, because 6 months takes a toll on a ship at sea. It is a rust bucket. Lots of corrosion, things like that. The airplanes landing on it constantly make the deck smooth, and so we have to re-non-skid it, which is like a texture, kind of a hard, more dense than asphalt, but it's just to make sure the airplanes don't slide off. So go to Australia, we resurface the deck for 3 weeks, and then we head back up to the Gulf. And from mid-January until March, we just kind of hang out. We fly sorties every day, still business as usual. We do sit on a lot of alert jets, which is something kind of new and different for us. That's where we would just kind of have a jet ready, loaded, and then we would have to have a person from each shop that could be there to, like, I would have to be there to arm things. We'd have a plane captain there, a maintenance guy. Anyway, just in case something happened, they could launch it in a quick hurry and get it wherever it needed to go. And then March 19th happened, which is Shock and Awe Day. And so I'll pick back up on my paper for this one. Our typical 12-hour shifts turned into 14 to 18-hour shifts. And I'll explain a little bit about why that happened. Typically, during peacetime, your daytime would be where you flew most of your sorties. You might have a couple that kind of went into nighttime, but by 7 or 8, we pretty much wrapped everything up. And the rest of the night was spent doing maintenance. Because, like I was talking about all those corrosion situations, there was lots of maintenance. We had inspections every day. We had launchers, things like that had to be, had to have corrosion control, had to be cleaned, washed constantly. Lots of maintenance to do, not just loading bombs. So what would happen is whatever was not accomplished during the day, and keep in mind, we're loading bombs 24 hours a day at this point. Like, it doesn't stop. It's just a rotating. They leave, they come back, we reload them. They leave, they come back. And we'll also take the time now to add that we had 12 jets in our squadron alone. They were not all for ordnance, though. Our Super Hornets had the capabilities of also refueling other planes. So we had a couple that were equipped to refuel. That was something that was really cool when we got our Super Hornets, because before that, we had to rely on the Air Force from other bases to refuel in flight, because we could not fly to Iraq and back to the ship on one tank of gas, especially on a loaded out aircraft, because we have external tanks, but you can't have all those external tanks if you're carrying bombs. So we had a couple that did that also. So we would have to hold off, the off-going shift would have to hold over to make sure all that maintenance was done too, while the ongoing shift continued to add, like, load ordnance and stuff like that. So that's why our work hours got really long. And that's kind of where I got my first little taste of how things were a little different for me, being a woman, versus everybody else. Since I was the only one and we were technically on call all the time, I wasn't able to go to my rack to go to sleep. So I spent an entire month sleeping in a ready room chair in our shop, and I was working nights at the time, so you can imagine how, and we were one deck down from the flight deck, so you can imagine with airplanes landing all day and people coming in and out, I was a zombie for a month, for sure. Let's see. So when hostilities ceased on April 9th, so 10 days short of a month is how long shock and awe went on, and then the push started after that. But our squadron alone had dropped 170 tons of ordnance, which I was part of loading probably a third of that. The wartime performance earned our squadron and the Abraham Battle Group the Navy Unit Commendation Medal. It also earned us a speech, a famous speech. So let's talk a little bit about the ladies out there on the ship. So out of 6,000 people on board, about 500 to 600 of us were women. So slim pickings. But I would say 90% were probably enlisted. That might be off a little bit, maybe 15% might have been officers, but most of us were enlisted. All the squadrons, so I'll also explain this. There's squadron people, or the air wing people on the ship, and there's ship's company. Squadron people do not live on the ship full time. We only live on the ship when we're deployed on it. We have bases that we're at, like ours was at Lemoore. Our Tomcat squadron was stationed over in Oceana, Virginia. And I think the P3s and the S3s were down, or not P3s, but the S3s and the Prowlers were stationed, our quads were stationed down in San Diego. So San Diego was kind of our unloading place. We all got on in San Diego, we all got off in San Diego. The ship was actually stationed up in Bremerton, Washington. So they drop all of us off and go up there. Okay, so between all the squadrons, ladies had our own berthing. The women that were on ship's company, and I'm sorry, I didn't finish about that. Ship's company actually lives on the ship all the time, even when they're not at sea. Obviously, if you're married, you have housing out on the base, but if you're just a single person, it's kind of the equivalency of living in the barracks. You'd live on the ship. So that's the difference between ship's company and the air wing. So there were probably about maybe 100, 125 of us in the one berthing, and that was all of the air wing's enlisted women. So we all lived together in one big berthing. We had 2 bathrooms, and each one of those maybe had 5 shower stalls. So yeah, the good thing is we weren't all on the same shift, so we move it around a little bit. And keep in mind, some of our admin jobs, even though they were air wing, they also kind of adhered to that 3 8-hour shifts. They didn't usually work a 12-hour shift. So we did have a little bit of flexibility in our different schedules, which helped a lot. It was definitely not a place to hang out though, because somebody was always sleeping. So the lights were always off. It was always very quiet. Lots of air conditioning, lots of noise. It was nice. Best sleep ever. It's awesome. So I'll talk a little bit now about being a plane captain versus an ordnanceman. I always encourage young people who want to join the military, to make sure they speak to a vet before they talk to a recruiter. And one of the reasons why is recruiters are really bad about not sharing all the details with you. So I was talked into, and of course the only person that had been in the military in my family was my grandfather from World War II, so things had changed a lot. So my parents didn't know any better, but I was talked into going undesignated. And what that means is you don't have a job. They'll put you wherever they want at first. You have the opportunity to eventually strike whatever job you want, and that's the selling point. They're like, well, you get to see all the other jobs. You get to see what you want to actually do before you choose one. So it's a great selling point, and at 17, that sounded like a fantastic idea to me. So that's how I ended up joining, and I was sent straight to the line shack, which is a TED position, which stands for temper. I had to actually Google that. It's an I didn't even type it in here. It's temporary additional duty, is I believe what it was. So it's kind of the little billets that they don't actually have a job for, but they still need to be done. They just kind of take people and stick them. You do it for about 3 months, and it's kind of a rotation. The line check is not a short little 3-month thing like that. You stay there until you are ready to take your advancement exam, and then you choose whichever job you want, and you take that advancement exam for that job. And that's how the military advances. It's a little bit off of evals, but it's mainly off of advancement exams. And the exams are pretty much over mainly your job and then a little bit of like military bearing, stuff like that. Problem is, if you choose a job, you're also sent to that job's A school. So you learn a lot about it at this A school. Those can take anywhere from 3 to 6 months sometimes. So they're long, good schools. You get a lot of education about what your job is. If you're a striker, you don't get to go to that school. You just go to I just went to an airman school that was 2 weeks that basically keeps you alive on the flight deck. Like that's all you learn. Like it's not anything real specific. So as a striker, you have to study yourself. And if you're smart, which I tried to be, you actually go and try to work with your shop. But that's going to be on your off time. So that's going to be after your 12-hour shift. So that's what I did. And I can honestly say that that is the only reason that I got to spend time in my shop as a woman. When I say I was the only woman in that shop, it's not because I was the only woman AO, or aviation ordnanceman, in my squadron. There were others. They never got to see the shop. You definitely had to earn your place there. They had to see that you were interested in working. They had to see that you had work ethic, that you were going to pull your own weight. And in that aspect of it, I can understand. The aspect I can't really understand is there are plenty of guys there that didn't pull their weight, that weren't good workers. So that was an interesting dynamic. But anyway, I went and worked with everybody, so everyone knew me really well. And they knew me from the line shack too, so they knew my work ethic was good. I spent 2 years in the line shack before I was able to strike out. And I believe I passed the advancement exam the first time I took it. And that's about the time we went on cruise for the long cruise that ended up being, I don't think I even finished that up, but that cruise ended up being 9 months. And we actually set a record for being out the longest since the Vietnam era. So it's a long cruise. Let's see. So some of the ordnance we loaded, I'm going to go through the pictures now. So this is us pulling back into San Diego after, it's actually interesting, George Bush actually flew out, but he didn't give the speech until we were actually pulled into San Diego, which I thought was kind of a fancy touch. He could have just got on the ship when we got there, but he actually flew the plane out and landed on the aircraft carrier step, which was kind of neat. And he spent about 2 days getting to know everybody. Like, he talked to everybody, shook a bunch of hands, didn't kiss any babies, but, you know. These are some of my brothers, and these are missiles. They're called Sparrows, and they have little fins that attach. A lot of our ordnance, well, none of our ordnance on the ship we really built. We had a couple of practice bombs that we would put cartridges into, but for the most part, our bombs, the load plans would go out the day before, and they were built below deck, and then they would come up, and then this is called the island. In fact, behind the island is where they would store all the ordnance for that day. You would go and you would check it out. Because not all of it, some of it was in our, like, not all of it was live ordnance, especially during non-war time. We weren't always loading live ordnance. So you had to, you know, sign it out. And obviously, if it was stuff that wasn't expended, you had to turn it back in at the end of the day. We wrote a lot of things on bombs. And I thought this was the only appropriate one I could find. So I thought I'd share that with you guys. But that's on one of those J-dams, those big 2,000-pounders. And I will say anything under 1,000 pounds, we hand loaded ourselves. Everything 1,000 pounds or over, we loaded with the hoist. And I'm going to use my fancy pointer. Maybe. Ah! That's my face! Right there. This is a 500 pounder. And this would, I think this was, you would have 5 people on this load plus your team leader, which is in the middle. So you'd have 3 people right here, and there's a hernia bar. You can see the end of it right there. We would stick a hernia bar on the front and then one in the back, and 2 guys would be at the back. And then we would just, and then there's 2 hooks right here on this launcher, and they would, these little eyes right here would go into those hooks, and that's how it's connected. And then on this particular one, you see the hole right there where we put the hernia bar. When we took the hernia bar out, we would fuse it. We would put a fuse in it and wire up the heat fuse. One of my very favorite things to do. There's my crew. It's like I was working days in because our lenses were dark. So when the war started, before the war started, every day we had these enormous tool pouches that we had to carry. And they're enormous for a normal sized person. They were really enormous for me. But we also, when the war started, had to carry one of these things on the other hip in like a case. Just in case. Anyway, this is us playing with them one day. That would be a good photo opportunity. This is just a normal morning. I've had some questions in the past about these catapults. They're steam driven. So in the morning, actually at the beginning of the original Top Gun, you can kind of see the steam coming off. That's what that's from, is the catapult. That's what powers it. There's me and my LPO, just hanging out. That's the whole crew. This is another picture of those 12 pounders, or 2,000 pounders, sorry, the JDAMs. And this is the hoist we loaded them with. So that would attach to that that launcher on the side of the plane, and it hoisted up. So that's me in the red there, and this is called final checking. And this is a qualification that you had to get. I felt like I still do this at my current job, but I feel like it's very important to be kind of not expendable. Like you need to be able to do all of the things. So besides being a plane captain, and then the Navy, this was, if you wanted to go on like the smaller detachments to like fun places like New Orleans and Key West and stuff like that, we had a lot of little things that we did like that. If you held a lot of different jobs, you would get picked because they didn't have to send as many people. And I could do 3 different things. I could be a plane captain, I could honor the ordinance, and I eventually got this qualification, which was called final checker quality. And what that is even when we're on land, and at sea, but even when we're on land too, right before the plane launches, even though a plane captain does the inspections, go through all the flight plan and do all of like the little hand motions, moving all the stabs and all the wings and things like that. This is the final check where we go and we walk the whole length of the plane while it's connected to the catapult, and we check all doors, fasteners, anything like that, make sure there's not FOD, which is foreign object damage. They can get sucked into the engine and destroy the engine. Those are $1 million engines, by the way. So you don't want that happening. But that's where you stay until the airplane takes off. So it's breezy. It was fun. It was fun. It was one of my favorite things to do. And there's my name on the airplane. They put your name and where you're from on your airplane. So this is us loading ordnance in Fallon, Nevada. And Fallon has become the new Top Gun. It's not in Miramar anymore, and it's not really, I'm not even sure they really call it Top Gun anymore, just because I think the basic dynamics of what they teach have changed a lot. Obviously, we don't do a lot of dogfighting or like air-to-air combat anymore. Most of our stuff is air-to-ground now. We do have a gun, which is where the name of this came from. The name of this lecture came from, Gals and 50 Cals. And the nose of our jet is a 50 cal gun, which I'll show you guys, that doesn't get used very often, and it is a pain in the butt, and I wish it wasn't in there, but apparently they need it. And those are those hernia bars I was telling you about. This is a Sidewinder. It goes on the tip of our wings. It's a missile. There's another picture of the JDAMs. I really like this picture. It has a fun story. I came across this picture, I think, on an internet search, and it was really interesting because these two guys I recognized immediately, and I knew they were my crew. And so I was like, oh my goodness, I found a picture I don't have. I've never seen it on anybody else's Facebook. I was all excited about it. And then I saw it. This person right here. That's me, and I'm upset. And I was trying to figure out why, like, I usually don't look like this. So I was like, I wonder what I was so upset about. And then it dawned on me, you see how clear my goggles are? See how all these people's glasses are dark? That I wasn't on my shift. I was having to hold over. So I'm very sleepy in this picture, and probably just asleep. But those are the JDAMs that I was talking about, those big 2,000-pounders. They were a favorite of ours back in that time. There's the steam coming off the cat. You can really see it good in that picture. Oh, here I am launching another airplane. Okay, so here's this terrible 50 cal I was telling you about. And some people loved messing with it. It was probably my least favorite thing that I had to do in my job. But I think every 21 days, or every time it was fired, which it was not fired very often. They did not use that thing that often. It was pretty rare. But we had to, you can see the hoist up here. We'd have to drop it down. That's it right there. And, of course, take it apart. This guy's cleaning a barrel of it. We'd have to clean all up in the compartment. It was big. It was cumbersome. Having to load ammunition in that thing was also, I wish I had a picture. I actually looked on Google. I couldn't really find anything. But it's this big thing on wheels that you have to wheel up to this door right here. And I can't even describe how difficult it is to get it attached to the gun itself because you can't see in there. It's kind of like just a feel, and the thing's heavy, and it's attached to this conveyor belt thing, and it's just a lot. So, and then you have to get up there and stand on top of that thing with a, what would it be called? Not a ratchet. This is this tool that you basically did this with, and it took about 15 minutes of doing that to load that thing. We usually would have to switch out because it was just, this thing was a lot. For the small amount that it got used, it's a lot. There's another picture of it. That's what it looks like when it's all together. It's heavy, really heavy. There's W giving a speech, and I know one of those airplanes, yeah, this airplane right here is ours, and that's some of our crew standing on it. I'm in there somewhere. There he is right after he landed on the flight deck. This guy right here is my squadron CO, actually. There's me having a good day. See, that's what my face, it's a terrible picture. These pictures are probably from disposable cameras. But I have a big smile on my face in that one. That was my usual demeanor. There we are loading another one of those Sidewinders that I was telling you about. That was not one of my favorite things to load just because I couldn't really reach it. I had to tiptoe that one. So this was a really cool project. After 9/11, we had some really good artists in our squadron, and I think on about 6 of our airplanes we commissioned some nose art that was 9/11 themed, 9/11 themed. In this particular fire station, we kind of adopted in a way. They ended up losing, I think, all but one firefighter that day. And a bunch of our pilots and officers still go and celebrate 9/11 with them every year. I don't know if celebrate's the right word, but they spend 9/11 with them, doing the different things, visiting with their families and stuff. And that's those little practice bombs I was talking about earlier. That's those. They're little blue, like little guy. In fact, I think that's one right there actually. And you can see that hole in the front of it. That's where we put the cartridge. Those are just for training. They do explode, but not like big explosion. And this is us on probably an on-ramp day, which means we're getting supplies because that's a supply, and we're not in our flight deck gear, which leads me to believe that this is probably what that is. This is a supply ship, and that's a helicopter that would bring all the supplies over. So I guess we took the opportunity to have a little picture taken. But to talk about the uniforms a little bit and what we wore on the flight deck, this is almost an entire outfit. The only thing that's missing would be the float coat, which I don't know. Oh, these guys are wearing them right here. They're these vest type things, and in that is actually a life preserver that's just deflated. And it's got a C2 cartridge, and it's got a little thing that you can blow it up. It also has a salt tab in it to where it would dissolve if you got blown over and you were unconscious and you couldn't pull the lever, which actually I would say probably half of the people that do get blown over aren't conscious because it's 90 feet and you're kind of going off with some force. Everybody loses a spleen. I don't know what that's about, but I mean, every time they lose a spleen. But that's what those are for. It's a pretty hot uniform, especially in the Gulf. I think temperatures with engines turning, they said were usually around 110, 115. And all of it was fire retardant, obviously. The cranials had to be worn pretty much all the time. Engines were turning. It supposedly saved our ears, but we all have tinnitus, so I'm not sure. And the goggles had to be down during when engines were turning because it's very windy. Things would get blown about. People would get blown about every once in a while. Our jerseys, though, our shirts. Also, this is not a uniform you could wear anywhere else. This is a strictly on the ship uniform. You couldn't wear this even like if you were in port. This was not a uniform, which we didn't really wear uniforms in port anyway, but this was not a uniform you could wear anywhere else. It's not really a uniform. It's just, and the jerseys, which is the shirt, the color is how you're identified on deck. So the red would have been ordnance or fire. And then we have the plane captain, which I was talking about earlier. Those are brown. Green was going to be for anything avionic, like electricians, the airframers, the mechanics, things like that. Your white was for quality control or the maintenance guys that headed up maintenance control, that sort of thing. It seems like this, our admin would sometimes wear these uniforms too. I'm not sure why, but they would wear white. Purple was for guys who refueled the aircraft. Is that everybody? Oh, yellow. Yellow is for the ABs. They're the ones who direct the airplanes, and the shooters, the officers that shoot the airplanes off the deck. Blue were for ABs also, but those were for like more the chain and chalk guys. Every time you're moving an airplane anywhere, it had to be chained and chalked down just because of the motion of the ocean. They were chained to these little pad eyes right here. And anytime I see those, I think of I don't know if anybody's ever heard of like WOG Day. So whenever you cross the equator, you have a ceremony called WOG Day, and you get a little certificate, but it's kind of their excuse to haze you a little bit. Not really, because we can't haze, but one of the games we played, why pad eyes remind me of that, one of the games we played is they would fill it, a lot of trash juice was involved, like dumpster juice, and they would get in these pad eyes, and then we would have to like blow it out with straws. I'm probably going to get in so much trouble for telling that story, but anyway, so we do fun little things like that all day long. No, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, but we actually, I'm actually a golden dragon because I participated in WOG Day when we crossed the equator and the international date line at the same time. I'm already in then. But anyway, so that's a fun little thing. Let's see what else. Haven't really hit on how dangerous it is up there. At one time, I don't think it is anymore, but at one time it was actually one of the most dangerous professions that you could have. And that is because there are airplanes everywhere turning constantly. And people do get blown off pretty often. About half of them we find. You don't even realize how vast the ocean is, I guess, until you're like a little bitty speck in it, and they can always find you. So you get crushed by them. You had to learn, and you did learn, and this is one of the things I learned, one of the few things they teach you in the small A school that I went to, were there were different foul lines on the deck that you can't cross during certain times. Like there's certain ones you can't cross when they're launching, and obviously when they're catching the arresting wire, there's another one you can't be across. The arresting wire is really dangerous. That's what this is right here. This is a tail hook, and this is how all of the airplanes got back on the ship. They would catch an arresting wire with that tail hook. And that's how you can kind of tell sometimes when they made a couple of mistakes in Top Gun, and some of the airplanes don't have those, so you're like, how to get on there. A crane, that's how. So that has actually snapped, not in my time, but it has actually snapped and sawed people in half before. So there's lots of things, obviously live ordnance everywhere. There's lots of things up there that can kill you. We didn't have too many incidences. We did have, in our sister squadron, we had a plane go down and lost a pilot. But outside of that, we didn't have too many terrible things happen. But you definitely have to pay attention all the time. But there's nothing else like it. Like nothing that you can do in the real world that even gets close. It's a lot of fun. I really enjoyed it. I'm already. I'm not quite 10 minutes. So I wanted to leave a little bit of time though to see if you guys had any questions. Maybe if I didn't cover something that you wanted to know about.
How much does one of those planes weigh?
Oh no.
A lot.
I will say they didn't always work, so sometimes they had to be craned off once we got to San Diego. In fact, that's a great thing to talk about, is how we were very fortunate and we had brand new planes on that second cruise. We still had F-14s on that cruise that maybe they might have 5 planes working at a time. They were just basically robbing, which F-14s, as cool as they are, and I will say, even though I worked on F-18s, F-14s, Tomcats are probably the coolest thing out there ever was. But man, they weren't dependable, even when they were new. And then when they got that old, they might have had 5 flying at a time. And they were just robbing parts off the rest of them. We had S-3s from the Vietnam era in one of our squadrons. So yeah, we were very fortunate. Our legacy Hornets that we had on the first cruise, they were kind of a mess. But apparently, and I didn't know this until I read some history on my squadron, is they had actually only had those for 2 deployments. So I don't know if we got them as leftovers from some other squadron or what had happened, but they were not in great shape. So I'm guessing maybe that's why we were in line to get the Super Hornets. I don't know. Could have been a lot of reasons. I've also heard it's like political and who our CEO was at the time, stuff like that. But I don't know, John. It's a question for Google. There are a lot. They do have 2 really big engines in them for sure that I know are very heavy. And that gun's real heavy. Oh, I know one thing that I can show you real quick. I can find a picture. Okay, so when I was talking about, I get asked a lot of times, people think these are bombs a lot, and they're not. Those are those external gas tanks I was telling you about. So for one of our refueling jets, I believe we could have up to 2 on each wing, and then you have the one that's always there, even on a fully loaded out airplane. You'd have the drop tank that's, let's see if I can find a picture. It's under the belly of the fuselage. You can see the nose of it right there. And they all had that. And it was just an extra external gas tank, because these gas tanks in these jets are actually in the wings and some parts of the fuselage. It's not that much, especially for us. It doesn't get you very far. Which is, like I said before, we could refuel in air. We had to rely on the Air Force and some base kind of close that could like help us out with that. But yeah, people think they're bombs a lot. In fact, I think on the Henderson page, Facebook page, a couple one of the gossip pages or selling pages or whatever, there was one outside of a pawn shop there for some reason, and everybody thought it was a bomb. And I'm like, It's shaped like a bomb, but it's not a bomb. It's just an outside fuel tank. But yeah, we could, I believe we could have two. Yeah, I know we could, because that's the outside power out there. We could have two on the outside, on each wing, and then the one in the middle. So you'd have 5 drop tanks in all. And that's how we were able to refuel. Yes?
Did you ever have to deal with some severe weather on the?
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad you asked. Yes and no. Not as often as you would think, only because our radars were so, top of the line, so we could see things. And so the only time we really had weather was if it was just so big we just couldn't get around it. It would take us hundreds of miles out of the way. We obviously wouldn't do that. But we did hit weather, and when we would hit weather, it was especially like wind and ship rocking a lot, we would have to chain the jets down even more. And I have a funny, well, it's not a funny story, but one time it happened, and my plane was all the way on the forward bow, like all as far as you go. It was on the very edge of the front of it. So I was literally walking and against the wind so hard that I was at an angle, and we had to carry, I think 8 chains was the minimum when it's good weather. So I always had 8 chains on me, but I think we had to do 16 when the weather was bad like that. So I had 16 chains, and I'm pretty sure they were the only thing holding me to the deck. So like coming back aft, I had to literally hold on to things. I was walking back, I was going to get blown off. Another time that we dealt with rough seas a lot, and I don't know the answer of why. I've Googled it a little bit, and I can't figure it out. It's got to have something to do with, I don't know if there's 2 bodies of water meet somewhere close or something, but anytime we were pulling into the port of San Diego the night before, and that ship is big, in most seas, we don't even feel it moving. Man, it was just like a seesaw, and I have no idea what it was, but every single time the night before we pulled into San Diego, it was like that. And a lot of people would be sick. A lot of sickness. But no, for the most part, we could get around the weather. They would use rain days as scrub-X days, which weren't real fun. They would cover the deck with soap, and we had these big straw brooms, and we'd have to, you'd just be in a line, and everybody would scrub to one side and scrub to the next side. And scrub to the next side. So yeah, that was kind of what we did in bad weather days. We didn't fly a lot. Going back to that detachment in New Orleans that I went on, it was a really fun detachment because we didn't do a lot of flying because it was in August and the weather was terrible, and they had lightning strikes every day, so we maybe flew till noon and then had fun the rest of the time. I saw my gunner a couple of months ago, back in, I guess, November. We all met down in San Antonio because one of our guys, he's in a few of these pictures, has developed ALS. And is really struggling, so we all kind of tried to go down and see him, and me and my gunner were talking one night over dinner, and I made the comment, I always felt safe with our, because I will say, I was very fortunate. I had an amazing squadron with really great leadership. Not everybody was as fortunate as I was, but I was very pleased with my time that I was in with my leadership and my command. But, I always felt safe. I always felt like we did what we were supposed to do, and we followed the rules and things like that. Except this one time, and he kind of looked at me and he's like, "Bell chase?" And I'm like, "Yes." And reminiscing on that, we had a lot of fun on that detachment, but not a lot of work going on. But yeah, that's about it with weather. Now, we did do a detachment to Alaska, which is probably my very least favorite one, because it was during the winter. In fact, the times you see us in coats on the flight deck, that's where we were. It was cold, it was miserable, I didn't enjoy it. Give me the Gulf any day. But there were some days that we would actually have to, a Prowler is an aircraft that stands pretty tall off the ground, and the exhaust shoots straight down instead of out, like you can see the exhaust shoots out. So they would have to tow it running around the deck to try to melt the ice before flight off started. So that was another weather thing that we dealt with, but that was only in Alaska. Like nowhere else did that ever happen. I'm sure I'm sure people or battle groups that are stationed, in the North Sea and stuff like that have to deal with stuff like that all the time, but 5th Fleet doesn't have to deal with that very often. So we were up there, I think, doing like little games with the Army, I believe. So yeah, that's all the weather that we really had. We would steer around it most of the time. Yes.
Obviously a high hazard environment, and then you just magnify that with it being wartime.
Mm-hmm.
What did you guys do as a crew to prepare yourselves every day to get out there in that environment mentally, emotionally?
Well, and that goes back to, we had really great leadership.
Yes.
And like I said, I still keep them. So our gunner is, gunners are the division officers over the ordnance shop. And what makes them kind of different than the rest of the shops is the rest of the shops kind of have a rotation of officers that can be really anything. But gunners are specifically warrant officers that were enlisted AOs at one time. And they became warrant officers. And they're kind of held in a little higher esteem because they were enlisted first. So you'd be hard pressed not to find a great gunner. But we had, I feel like, an especially great gunner. And he was great about keeping morale high. To piggyback onto that, though, once Shock and Awe started, I guess we were a little bit more content because we were working and we had something we were working towards. But the couple of months leading up to that, where we were just kind of hanging out, were hard. And the reason why is we had no date. We didn't know when we were going home. The joke around the carrier kind of became that the nuclear reactor that the ship ran off had to be overhauled in 20 years, so we know we were going in. That kind of became the running joke, because we had no idea, and that really, morale really suffered, especially since we'd already been out there for 6 months, 6 or 7 months at that time. So it was low, but then once things got started, and plus you have to keep in mind we're all really young and don't know any better. I mean, the average age of us was probably 20, the average age. So we don't know any better, and we're just doing stuff, and we're excited about it. And that really kept us going during that time. We thought we were doing something. Yes?
Obviously, you learn a lot of skills, but what is one skill that you think up to today is as a woman in that group and what you use today in your current job?
That's a great question because I still work in a very male-dominated field. I'm a land surveyor now, and one of the very few field land surveyors that are women in the state. And I think probably the biggest takeaway of it is, might be surprising, but I grew a really thick skin and I stopped taking stuff quite as personal. And then, I can't say I really took this away from the Navy because I kind of think I was like this before, which is what led me to pick the job I picked in the Navy. But I really like proving people wrong. So, that was pretty much a guaranteed way to get me to do something, is to tell me I couldn't. So I think I took that with me because I don't think, my dad and my family, and most of the men in my family are surveyors, and I don't think they ever dreamed that any of the women in their family would become surveyors. And I think I had, not my dad particularly, but I think I had probably a couple uncles that were like, even after I'd been in the Navy, we were real skeptical, which is funny because the Navy was a much harder job than surveying is. But, they were really skeptical, which kind of, I did it for a while and loved it, but it was one thing that really drove me to be like, no, this is going to be my career because you don't think it can be. So I would say that's probably what I learned the most. Or took away from it anyway. But I learned lots of lessons, and some of them were just coming to age lessons, but another thing I really learned was you had to make the choice of being friendly and being liked or being respected. And they didn't go hand in hand. I still feel like they don't. I'm not friends with my coworkers really, and I'm okay with that. That's just, I feel like, a choice that we have to make sometimes in those situations. I can say that did not go for the men in my particular shop. Like in the rest of my squadron or other squadrons, yes, but I will say the men in my shop were very respectful. And I will say this, it took a lot less time for me to earn respect in the Navy than it did in the civilian world. I can honestly say I still don't really have it in the civilian world from a lot of my coworkers. But I would say within a month of being in my shop in the Navy, I had it, and I was one of them. And yeah, it was great. Again, though, I don't know that everybody had that same experience, but that was my experience. Nobody else? Okay.
F-18, 32,400 pounds.
Oh.
Oh, you go. I thought you came in going, and we're going to
I
be
just
live.
Googled it.
That's a lot. That's a lot.
And that's without bombs.
That's without bombs. Wow. Our probably drop tanks or fuel or anything else, so that's a lot. Yeah, so just think about, and that's one of the things, it's like, oh, this is a fun story. So like I said earlier, the ship was already out to sea when I got flown onto it. I got flown on from Jabali, because it had already been out on its cruise before I was out of A school. So I had not seen the ship from the outside before I got on it. So I lived on it for about 3 or 4 months before we pulled in at Christmas into Jabali. That was our only port visit that entire cruise until we went home to Australia. That first one was we pulled into Jabali on Christmas and they had like a little beer garden. So apparently they thought drinking was the only thing we wanted to do. It was available to do. But we did get off for Christmas, and we were pulled port side. And I remember when I got off, of course, I was 18 years old at this time. I get off, and I just remember looking at it and being so blown away by how big it was. Because even though I had been working on it for a couple of months, I had no concept of how big it was. They're enormous. They're so big. And how they float is just, because I think the ship itself is heavy, and then they've got all the aircraft and all the personnel and everything on it. It's amazing. It's pretty amazing. And actually, so I spent 2 Christmases on cruises, and the other Christmas, like I said, we were in Australia again on that Christmas, and that's when we resurfaced the deck. And I just want to give Australians a shout out, because I don't know if things are still like this, because again, this was like 20 years ago, but there were cars lined up at the port gate to take sailors home for Christmas. So it was really awesome. Yeah, Australians were great to us at the time.
Was that, when you landed, was that your first landing on a ship?
Mm-hmm. I actually got the opportunity to land and fly off of one.
Was that scary? Because it sounds scary to me.
I was young and loved things like that, so I loved it. It was interesting because we were sitting backwards because we were on a big plane, so it was just kind of, it was different. There's a lot of, you had to like sit a certain way so you didn't get like whiplash, but yeah, that was fun. I forgot why I got flown off. I think I got flown off more than once. I think one time I was doing a different detachment before the ship got back. I think it was just, we were out on like a small like workup, so we were like out in like the Pacific off the coast of either Mexico or California. And so some of us flew off to go on a detachment somewhere, to start a detachment somewhere else. And then one time my grandmother died while we were out on a detachment, and they flew me off for that. So I got to fly off a couple of times. Once on a helicopter, which was kind of neat too, and then one on an airplane. So the whole thing.
That's gotta feel kind of scary.
It's different. It's different. And there's a lot of like, because as y'all have seen in movies, like the pilot has to, hit that thing just right. The ship's pitching. Even though we can't feel it, the ship is moving in the water. And so the plane is moving a little too. Not like when you're landing on land and it's flat and they don't have to do that so much, but you're kind of like, oh no, like, is it gonna find the deck? Like, there's a little movement there. There's a little movement, so.
Wow. That's awesome. Thank you.
It was awesome. It was a great 4 years. I have nothing but good things to say. Some of my brothers say it's because I only remember the good things.
Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. There was a lot of good. I tell people a lot, especially like around Veterans Day and things like that. Everybody wants to thank you for your service, which is always appreciated. But I feel 100% the Navy gave me a lot more than I gave the Navy. So it was a good experience. I try to hype it up to young folk. Because my husband is actually a 22-year retired Marine, so he had a good experience with it too, because he now is retired at 40. something. Be the dog dad. So, anywho. Well, thank you guys so much, and thank you to Nikki.